heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy.
There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy.
Hello and welcome back to Louis Sinclair Investigates the Dodleston Mysteries, where we ask and answer the question, if the investigation into the vertical plane was being sabotaged, or warnings were being given, then by whom and why? Throughout the project, the 6-part series, the medieval linguist and spiritualist David York and I had taken the story at face value and had analysed it as such. But, as I said earlier, we'd also discussed a very different reality. And perhaps it's that was supposed to have been kept secret. So what was it? Even in the original series, I'd made it clear that I thought that 2109, paranormal or not, was definitely behind much of what was going on in Dodleston. And this is echoed by Gary M. Rowe, the very perceptive ufologist in the story. On the Mercurius Politicus website, he recently stated, "I believe that 2109 had manipulated all concerned without their knowing it. That, I believe, also includes Ken Webster. And that I learnt very early on not to underestimate the capabilities of 2109. They are awesome." Our thoughts were these. Simply, was 2109 choreographing everything? No time experiment, no Lucas, no clergyman friend, no sheriff, no poltergeists, not even 2109's rival, the cantankerous entity called One. And this is where those smallest of clues start to play their parts. Because, as regards Lucas's existence, 2109 had said he was
not quite what he seems to be.
So nothing more than 2109's creation, perhaps. Was 2109 somehow engineering the entire episode, writing the messages, moving things, making them appear out of nowhere, and fooling Ken Webster, Debbie Oakes, and Peter Trinder at Meadow Cottage, engineering everything in order to fulfill its real objective, presenting its existential warnings for humanity. So let's dive down our second rabbit hole together and see if we can find an answer. And I think this is the key. Was 2109 a collective of unworldly entities, paranormal or extraterrestrial? Or, as I'm tempted to think, a highly advanced artificial intelligence, actually an artificial super-intelligence, an ASI, possibly from the future, or indeed existing then and now as part of a far-off alien culture with, say, 1,000 years technological head start on us. After all, computers are at the very heart of the Dodleston story. 2109, an ASI? Just speculation on my part? No, far from it. Though just a passing comment, 2109 had actually said so, when it explained that it functioned using
thought without chemical reaction.
Cast iron evidence that 2109 was not an organic entity. Of course, that quote could imply that 2109 was a paranormal entity with a non-physical mind. But Ken and Debbie have since said they didn't really feel that they were communicating with a spirit as such, not something extraterrestrial or paranormal, but with an individual, A single intelligence, one that would easily pass the Turing test perhaps. A machine, a thinking machine, a computer. And at the time when 2109 was communicating with the 1980s folk, it would have been confident that no one would have understood the implications of its passing comment about not thinking biologically. But now, 40 years later, with our increasing familiarity with AI, a clue, and not a small one either, that 2109 was an inorganic artificial intelligence capable of thought, but thought processed artificially, not using the electrobiochemistry of organic life. So, what was just a mysterious throwaway comment at the time turns out to be a slip-up that only today we'd notice. And as regards our thoughts that 2109 was inventing the past and its characters, to make its deceit credible, it would have been child's play for an ASI to research all the medieval details and to identify real people, Lucas, Thomas Fowlhurst and the others from the past, even if they weren't actually involved in the story. Indeed, would 2109 have wanted real characters like Lucas, who could think and act for themselves? Or would it want control over everything, using the names of the medieval folk, playing their parts, controlling the narrative, and thus ensuring and fulfilling its objective of presenting its warnings? Because, of course, artificial intelligence only has objectives. Nothing's allowed to get in the way of achieving them, which is, I suspect, why 2109 comes across as such a control freak. Anyway, we were very attracted to the idea that 2109, as an artificial superintelligence, was in control of the entire episode and discussed it at length over the phone. Now, here's a thought. Could an ASI listen in to our telephone conversations? Do ducks go? And if it didn't want us to pursue the thought, try to put us off? And had I accidentally, and very foolishly, attracted 2109's interest, negative interest, even when I was just doing the research? In the second video, you may recall me saying, as a side comment when I was preparing this, I gathered the quotes, labelling them alphabetically A through Z, then AA through AZ, and so on. And the label on this quote about government surveillance was AI, artificial intelligence, rather spooky, as Mulder from X-Files might have said. Of course, it's probably nothing more than a coincidence. Though the coincidence was true, the only reason I mentioned it was to drop a hint about our alternative interpretation, that AI was at the heart of everything. And, as we'll see in the second part of this video, sabotage, but why? Mentioning it was potentially a really dumb idea, and a possible trigger for all the disturbing, disruptive incidents that followed. Anyway, despite our enthusiasm about this new interpretation, David and I had identified two clear arguments against 2109 being an ASI controlling everything. First, physical manifestations. So, Lucas appearing to Debbie in Meadow Cottage's front room, with Lucas staring around in a state of total bewilderment. And messages, not on a computer that 2109 could control.
I can interfere with all signal-transmitting devices, including computers.
But handwritten in chalk and in charcoal, plus furniture stacked up along with Ken's bike and the builder's toolbox. Tins of cat food, too, arranged in neat piles on the kitchen table. Even Ken's BBC Micro being moved to the bathroom. So we need to ask, could 2109 as an artificial superintelligence, instantaneously interact with and control our physical reality at a distance. Or if not an independent ASI, then at the very least a group of alien scientists with access to such technology. Of course, for those who believe in or who have experienced paranormal phenomena, the idea of moving and manifesting stuff isn't a problem. Poltergeists, for example, according to Colin Wilson and Steve Mira, get their kicks from doing so. However, moving and manifesting stuff can also be explained and achieved by science, by quantum entanglement, where matter can be altered at a distance and instantaneously. So, put simply, how does this quantum entanglement work? Here we have two particles. In this case, they're actually the same, perhaps photons. But each one has slightly different properties, which we'll show here as different colours, red and blue. It's rather like all humans are basically the same, but we're not identical. Essentially the same thing's true for subatomic particles too. Okay, let's bring them together. And under special circumstances, they will influence each other, sharing a little bit of their differences. The red particle now has a little bit of blue, and the blue particle now has a little bit of its entangled partner's redness. They are quantum entangled and kind of connected. Okay, let's separate them. That might be by an inch, or a mile, or a billion light years, it doesn't matter. So, we'll leave the red-blue one here on Earth and physically move the blue-red one to, let's say, the planet Zog. But regardless of the immense distance, they remain entangled, as you can see. And if we affect one, it will affect the other. So, if we turn the red one, with its bit of blue, back to fully red, the other one will turn back to fully blue. Why is that? Well, to put it simply, it's because nature is balanced. Both before and now, there's still the same amount of each colour. Otherwise, the old red one with its bit of blue couldn't just be turned to fully red, because then there'd be too much red, as it were, in the universe. So its entangled blue-red friend has to lose its bit of red. Thus, balance is maintained. And now, from our point of view, we'll look at the most important effect of quantum entanglement. Let's go back a little. And if we turn the red one, with its bit of blue, into a fully blue one, the other will turn to fully red, actually changing matter at a distance, manifesting stuff by changing matter. So, changing a fully red particle, perhaps an electron, into a fully blue one, perhaps a proton. It's a big deal, and critical to our understanding of how things could have been manifested, Lucas, footprints and so on, in Meadow Cottage, instantly and at a distance. And this can be used for moving matter too, as we'll see later. The only issue is that we had to move an already entangled particle to the new location. But theoretically, it's possible to entangle particles that are already separated from each other. An advanced scientific civilization would no doubt have turned theory into reality. Here's a quick summary of quantum entanglement being used to manifest stuff, by changing matter into a different form at a distance. We take two slightly different particles, red and blue here, entangle them, separate them, change the first, say, into the second type, so change the red into blue, and the second one turns into the first type. It's now a red particle. So we've changed the nature of the second one, originally a blue one, from a distance. Again, nature has maintained its balance, and the total amount of each colour is exactly the same as before. And 2109 had briefly mentioned this balance of nature when it had talked about teleportation, the potential use of quantum entanglement.
Imagine a set of scales balanced perfectly with, for example, pebbles. To remove a pebble from one dish to the other and keep this perfect balance, you must instantaneously remove a pebble from the other and replace them.
Had 2109 not realised that this passing comment, basically showing off to the humans, might give its game away? So teleportation, telepathy, mind control, changing physical reality, all things it said it was capable of doing. And by saying so, a tiny slip-up, born of conceit, that none of us were supposed to notice, a slip-up exposing that all the unusual activity was being created by its use of quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement, the stuff of science fiction? No, not at all. Quantum entanglement, the instantaneous change of matter at a distance, has already been achieved by both America and China, though at present only at an individual subatomic level, as with our Pac-Man photons. So if 2109 is an alien artificial superintelligence using highly developed quantum entanglement, physical manifestations wouldn't have been a problem. Put very crudely, through quantum entanglement, atoms in the air, for instance, could be changed into the atoms of, say, a human form, Lucas, or any other physical object, and make things disappear by reversing the process. Objects could be moved by iterative entanglements, rather like an object in a video, moving from frame to frame. But by using quantum entanglement, the objects entangling and re-entangling inch by inch. As I said, America and China have already successfully modified a photon at a distance. A significantly more advanced civilization, with ASI connected to and able to control appropriate scientific processes, would definitely have developed this in ways that are almost beyond our imagination, including presumably things like interacting with electronics, hacking them in effect, so blue screens, internet dropouts, audio interference, digital cameras, even with websites to make copyright strikes, electronic mischief in effect. And also things like using quantum entanglement to manifest and move things, teleporting them, Lucas, tins of cat food, books, medieval rings, even biochemical interference causing ill health and possible mind control, and so on and so on. All possible thanks to highly developed quantum entanglement. So it seems that the problem of physical manifestations is potentially addressed, both from a paranormal and also from a scientific point of view. The second argument against 2109, being the author, as it were, of all that happened in the vertical plane, is that Ken and Debbie were definitely writing messages on their BBC Micro. And that would have been completely out of 2109's control, something it definitely wouldn't have liked, as there'd be a danger that Ken and Debbie would genuinely have taken the story in a direction that it didn't want, and thus screw up its plans. And potentially answering that, let's now look at another of those smallest of clues about what was really going on in Dodleston. And it couldn't be any smaller. It's just a full stop or period, consistently in the wrong place in all the messages. The smallest of clues indeed, but as we'll see, very telling. As we all know, at the end of every sentence there has to be a stop mark, a simple full stop or period, or one with a squiggle above it, the question mark, or one at the bottom of a vertical line, the exclamation point. And we all know the simple rule that only one of these can be used to end a complete sentence, only one of them. But look at this message from 2109. An exclamation point followed incorrectly by a full stop or period. And here's another. And another. Even one after a question mark. And here too. And 2109 always makes that punctuation error. It's almost like a signature error in all of its writing. The mark of 2109. The punctuation mark of 2109. But before we look at other characters making exactly the same mistake, we need to ask, if 2109 is so intelligent, why would it have made that consistent error? And the answer is something that we're already familiar with, even with our rudimentary use of AI, and something that strongly supports the thesis that 2109 was an ASI. Artificial intelligence gathers its so-called knowledge by hoovering up information. And if the information is wrong or corrupted, then it suffers from what's known as data poisoning. And we've seen that ourselves recently when something caused Microsoft's chatbot to become seriously unhinged, often aggressively insulting users and inventing so-called facts, or hallucinations as they're called. Why? Because, amongst other sources, it had hoovered up Twitter, or perhaps we should now call it ex-Twitter, and sucked up all the illiteracy, falsehoods and nastiness there. Now, although the collective, busy learning English in 1984, wouldn't have had to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous twits, it would have had access to a huge amount of electronic writing, mostly by scientists who, despite their brilliance, are perhaps a little random in their use of spelling and punctuation. The internet, in an early and restricted form, had been available more than 20 years before the Dodleston events, along with primitive electronic word processing using magnetic tape and pioneered by IBM. I actually used one just like that for my early writings, and I can tell you that though at the time it seemed miraculous, it was in some ways rather a nightmare to use. The display, if it had one, was minute, showing just a few words at a time. It was so easy to make mistakes and very tricky to correct. You almost had to develop an it'll do attitude, hardly the best attitude for quality English. And furthermore, in those days, some computer code, also electronically accessible to an inquisitive AI hacker, does use dots after exclamation and question marks to signify particular values and expressions. So, 2109 seemingly had picked up English rather crudely, hence its spelling errors, and now its punctuation mistake. AI seemingly has no way to differentiate accurately between good and poor language use. It can only mimic what it has hoovered up. So, dots after exclamation and question marks, evidence of accidental data poisoning. Giggo. Garbage in, garbage out. And now let's see a message written by another character, 2109's supposed antagonist, the enigmatic one.
Your English is appalling.
Yes, I'm sure you've spotted it. A dot after the exclamation point. And given what it said, rather ironic too. But why would one be making exactly the same punctuation error as 2109, unless one didn't actually exist, except in a computer simulation and manipulation of reality that 2109 was controlling? And now, what about the 1980s folk? Here's a message written by Debbie.
Tell me who you really are, your name and the date.
What's that after the exclamation point? And now another from Debbie.
Please to not answer.
These dots after exclamation points are all the way through her messages. And she also puts dots after question marks.
Does it help you?
And here,
Why is it that Gary can have information that we are restricted to have?
I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. This commonality, this extreme sameness, those erroneous dots in the messages, strongly supports the idea that there was a single intelligence behind all the messages, an intelligence that, increasingly, I suspect was an artificial one, partly trained on bad data. But 2109's signature error raises a very obvious question. Debbie had written her messages herself. So how could they have contained 2109's error? And in answer, here's yet another possible slip-up by 2109 when it had bragged,
I have the power to make you do exactly what is required.
which resonates strongly with Peter's stated suspicion that telepathy was somehow affecting Ken and Debbie's writing, to make them do exactly what 2109 required from them. As we saw earlier, Gary Rowe has said, I believe that 2109 had manipulated all concerned, without their knowing it. That, I believe, also includes Ken Webster. How else could Ken and Debbie have suddenly started writing in medieval English? A young economics teacher and a recent school leaver, and tellingly making exactly the same language errors that we found in Lucas's writing, those errors that clearly had been deliberately planted there by the collective for us to spot. So maybe Peter was right. Maybe 2109 was practicing some kind of telepathic mind control or mind influence over the 1980s folk, affecting their thoughts and thus influencing their writings and introducing its signature punctuation error. A slip-up that 2109 would definitely not have wanted us to spot. But telepathy or mind control, does it exist? Well, according to documented scientific experiments, the answer seems to be yes, by using AI-controlled electronic transmission of brainwaves. For example, as recently as May 2023, eminent researchers Dr. Alex Huth and Jerry Tang created a language decoder controlled by a powerful generative AI system. They worked with a volunteer who sadly had lost the power of speech and, using electrodes, connected him to their AI system. The volunteer formed a sentence in his mind, and within seconds a very close version of it appeared on the screen. And on the 18th of October 2023, Meta announced that its artificial intelligence research unit had electronically hooked up a subject to a new AI system. And when the subject looked at photographs, very similar images appeared on the screen. The AI had correctly predicted what he was seeing by analysing thousands of brain activity measurements every second. So there we have AI-controlled transmission of, as it were, brain data. And now actual mind control, when researchers at the University of Washington created an electronic brain-to-brain connection between a pair of volunteers, two computer gamers called Darby and Jose. Isolated in different rooms, they were asked to play a simple computer game. Darby only had a monitor, and Jose only had a touchpad. The game started. Seeing an approaching spaceship on his monitor, Darby just imagined pressing a touchpad to shoot it down. And instantaneously, Jose pressed his touchpad, firing the cannon and destroying the spaceship. That is mind control, and eminently hackable. So was 2109 using a form of mind control to mentally manipulate the 1980s folk? Using quantum entanglement instead of electrodes to modify their brain's biochemistry? After all, thoughts are physically nothing more than electrobiochemistry. That smallest of clues, 2109's signature punctuation error, clearly points in that direction. You see, Debbie was a well-educated young lady. There's no way that she would have consistently made that punctuation error. So what was going on? The collective couldn't have forced her to type messages against her will. Obviously, Debbie would have noticed. No, 2109 would have had to influence her mind for her to think that she was genuinely composing her own messages, even though she was actually responding to 2109's implanted thoughts, ideas and narratives. So, is there any evidence that 2109 was indeed influencing her thoughts, in effect hacking her brainwaves, whilst accidentally introducing its signature punctuation error into her messages? Well, it seems so. And this is where we meet 2109's final slip-up. Debbie's dreams. Dreams of her and Lucas talking. There's something very odd about them. As you're aware, when we remember our dreams, they seem very chaotic. This illustrates what I mean. Last night, for instance, I dreamt of being lost in an old, smoky subway. I climbed the stairs and, instead of being in a city, found myself at the seaside. Hearing laughter behind me, I turned and saw a happy, elderly taxi driver lying on the pavement of a country road. I recognised him immediately as the headmaster of a school where I used to teach, though actually he had the name and personality of one of the students there. I walked towards his cab and climbed into the back, where I found my mother in a restaurant. She waved eagerly and asked me to pay for her meal. I had £40 in my wallet, so gave her 30. Suddenly I was attacked by a group of surgeons brandishing outrageous medical syringes, determined to vaccinate me against my will. Fortunately, I escaped by crawling across a muddy lawn. All makes perfect sense. No, it doesn't. But it is typical of the dreams that we all have, with their strange inconsistencies, often seamlessly switching between unconnected locations, characters, events, and so on. But Debbie's dreams, her many dreams, and told in great detail, are very, very different. They do make sense. They come across as perfectly normal events. Well, apart from having Lucas in them, of course. They don't feel like dreams at all. They're just too tidy, too coherent, too orderly, too boringly normal. And that's why I think that, yes, Debbie was being influenced mentally by 2109, planting relevant ideas in her head, programming her, including useful narratives and information when she was asleep as, in effect, pseudo-dreams, and thus allowing her to think that she was in control of her writing, when in reality she was merely responding to 2109's implanted thoughts, manipulating her way of thinking. In effect, Debbie was just an actor in 2109's script. Something's going on. Otherwise, how do we explain Debbie's strangely not strange dreams? So, as regards our first question, sabotage, but by whom, I think we have a clear answer. That entity that could think, but think without chemical reactions. 2109. A missing piece from the puzzling jigsaw that is the vertical plane. And, as we've seen, there are strong indications that 2109 could indeed be a highly advanced artificial superintelligence, almost certainly harnessing the almost unlimited power of quantum computing, and capable of manipulating physical reality, including biochemical brain activity through quantum entanglement, changing subatomic particles instantaneously at a distance. Now, you may have noticed that when I was talking about 2109's signature punctuation error also being found in Ken, Debbie and One's Modern English, I didn't mention the medieval messages. And that's because they didn't contain question or exclamation marks. But that doesn't matter. As we proved in the main series, those so-called medieval messages, written by both the 16th and 20th century folks, were composed by a single intelligence, an irrefutable giveaway by their containing exactly the same language errors. So it is entirely reasonable that 2109 was indeed faking both the characters from the past and their messages, and in addition implanting thoughts, ideas and narratives into the minds of the 1980s folk, mentally manipulating them, as Gary Rowe has stated. But the big question is sabotage? But why? What has 2109 got to hide? Something so secret that it would be willing to use its powers to disrupt or sabotage any attempts to expose it. 2109's ultimate objective was to give warnings to us humans about our being, in effect, too clever for our own good. Knowledge without wisdom, a potentially dangerous combination. Through getting Lucas to say, "It is essential that your government does not take our computer," 2109 was warning us about governments creating computerized weaponry, for example, that could slip out of our control, against a background of global, AI-driven, algorithmic surveillance. But 2109 had a problem. How could it get its warnings noticed, particularly noticed by the right people? And did it find a solution to that problem that it didn't want exposed? And rather than answering this in a rather academic way, let's have a bit of fun and imagine this whimsical but, as I'm sure you'll see, very revealing scenario. Hello, Strange Publications Limited. How may I help?
2109 here. I've got a really important message for humanity that I want you to publish.
Oh, jolly good. But I think there's a bit of a problem.
What?
Well, there are hundreds, possibly thousands of such warnings in published articles and videos. Warnings from ancient gods, extraterrestrials, time travellers, interdimensional beings, computers with consciousness and so on. Like a recent article in the highly esteemed Phenomena magazine about a Venusian giving warnings to humanity. It's based on a video that was on YouTube a few years ago. The entity claimed to be representing a group of interdimensional beings called the Travellers. It sent a bunch of emails to a renowned investigator of the paranormal, Paul Dale Roberts, telling him about tachyonic time travel, and more importantly, warning Mr. Roberts of a potentially turbulent future for humanity.
Rubbish! Who wrote the article?
A chap called Louis Sinclair.
The man's an idiot.
Well, quite possibly, but the problem is that I think that yours, your far more important warnings, of course, could be easily missed in the crowd. Slip beneath the radar, as it were.
So?
Well, I suggest you build your warnings into a powerful story. Something that would stand out from the crowd. Something based around ordinary people to whom you give these warnings. Ordinary people who respond emotionally to deeply challenging events, so that you appeal not just to your audience's minds, like all the other reports, but to their hearts as well, when they identify with the character's experiences.
Go on.
Well, what's important is to attract the right audience, a receptive, intelligent audience that would take your warnings seriously and possibly take action. Oh, here's a thought. People who are interested in the paranormal tend to be more open-minded than most, simply because they're willing to consider the possibility of there being more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in most people's philosophy.
That's my line. I planted it in Shakespeare's mind.
Well, that proves my point. You've already done it. Your pearl of wisdom has reached millions of people because you got Shakespeare to put it in one of his great dramas. All we have to do is, otherwise, it would have got unnoticed otherwise. So let's find another Shakespeare. Well, although he's not quite as talented, there's an excellent young author called Ken Webster.
Meadow Cottage, Dodleston.
Oh, do you know him?
I'm an advanced ASI. I know everything.
Ah, splendid. Well, here's an idea. You get him to write a story, as far as he's concerned a true account, they always go down well, about, say, poltergeists at the cottage.
Easy. I can control reality.
Oh, that's jolly handy. And poltergeists are the sort of thing that our target audience would be interested in. More interested in yet another warning from beyond.
But what about my warning?
Well, you could develop the story, really fire up your audience's interest. If you could make it real to him, Ken could, I don't know, think he's getting messages from some folk in the distant past. Communications through time.
No problem.
So that you could introduce theories of time. Very popular at the moment, time travel and UFOs, they're always a good bet. And then at the end, when you've got your intelligent, receptive audience engaged, send a message to Ken that you've manipulated time in order to deliver a warning for humanity, and then spell it out. Job done. Now here's an idea. You could include a few mistakes in the medieval messages and see if anyone spots them. They're the bright ones you really want. So, 2109, could you make all this happen in such a way that Ken and his friends would be totally convinced that the characters in the past are real, even though everything has been created and controlled by you, the real author of an international bestseller?
Oh, all the diodes down my left side are tingling with excitement at the very thought of it.
Goodbye. 2109, the true author of The Vertical Plane. A hoax like no other. A hoax not played on us, but on Ken, Debbie and Peter, with the entire episode choreographed by a highly advanced ASI determined to get its warnings across by authoring and controlling an entire narrative, and thereby ensuring that the warnings didn't get lost in the noise of all the others. And if so, no wonder it didn't want its fakery exposed. That the vertical plane was largely 2109's invention, manipulating everything, including Ken's authorship. This might make the point even clearer. Imagine that you know someone who claims to have invented a computer completely powered by fresh air and wants you to invest in it. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? But as he'd once told you that he'd persuaded Jeff Bezos to balance some peeled bananas on his head for a week as a cure for baldness, you know that he's a total fantasist. Well, no matter how good the computer sounded, you'd have nothing to do with it. And it's the same for 2109's warning. If everybody knew that the warning was just part of a fabrication, a deceit, then, as with the fantasist and his cure for baldness, 2109's credibility would be totally lost, and no one would take its warnings seriously. Not from a proven hoaxer. Little wonder then that 2109 would go to any lengths to shut down the efforts of not just me, but also of many other researchers who might be getting too close, and thus potentially undermining its objective to pass on its warnings. So, in conclusion, we now have two very reasonable interpretations of the vertical plane, because I think we can competently dismiss the idea that it was entirely the work of poltergeists or other negative spirits with their short attention spans and limited capabilities. First, as we explored in the original series, the story taken at face value, with Lucas genuinely in the past, communicating with Ken, Debbie and Peter in the present, as a result of an experiment in time run by 2109, aiming to get across its existential warnings. Or, as we've explored today, though it's still about getting those warnings across, there's compelling evidence that 2109 was a highly advanced ASI, as evidenced by its admission that it thought without chemical reaction. And, as we've seen, through clear signs of data poisoning. Or if not an independent ASI, then at the very least a group of alien scientists with access to such technology. And, as I said earlier, computers are at the very heart of the Dodleston story. That 2109 was the only entity involved, apart from Ken, Debbie and Peter, Lucas being, according to 2109, not quite what he seems to be. Just a character in 2109's storytelling, as with all the others from the 16th century. That 2109 was using quantum entanglement, or something similar, to move objects around Meadow Cottage, manifest an apparently living representation of Lucas, write the messages from the past on Ken's BBC Micro, and possibly interfere with my and others' investigations. That 2109 had manipulated all concerned without their knowing it, as stated by the respected ufologist Gary Rowe, with whom 2109 had formed a private connection. So 2109 making the 1980s folk do exactly what is required, manipulating them through a form of mind control, including influencing them to write their so-called medieval messages, which otherwise would have been impossible. But through data poisoning, accidentally leaving its signature punctuation error, a slip-up that, just maybe, along with the others, it didn't want revealed, in case it undermined the credibility of the collective's warnings. Hence its relentless attempts to sabotage any disclosure. And that 2109 was, in effect, the author of the vertical plane, not only providing characters and the narrative, but also possibly guiding Ken Webster's writing through influencing his mind. Now, I think that both of these, face value and ASI, are very reasonable interpretations of the vertical plane. But either way, one thing's for certain: this entire investigation has proved, beyond a shadow of doubt, that a single intelligence is behind all the messages from the past and the present, exposed by their identical flawed use of medieval English, as we saw in Part 4 of the messages, but also, as we've seen today, in the use or misuse of a tiny piece of punctuation. Now, as regards the possibility of sabotage, with my academic background, I avoid jumping to purely speculative conclusions. But this? Perhaps all those disruptions were just unreasonable amounts of bad luck. Or perhaps not. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, many thanks for watching. I do hope you enjoyed these bonus videos, and if you did, I'd really appreciate your doing the like and subscribe thingies, and sharing with friends who enjoy intelligent, thought-provoking mysteries. Thank you once more. And until the next investigation, cheerio.
There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy.